conflicting messages being sent out from Donald Trump and Netanyahu after that humiliation ritual that occurred in Egypt and what happened at the Knesset on the same day when the ceasefire was established. Here's Donald Trump's message, a very sensitive, almost angry kind of response to those asking if this war, the genocide in Gaza, is truly over.
Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, has not gone so far as to say the war is over. In your view, is the war between Israel and Hamas over?
The war is over. The war is over. Okay, you understand that?
That was his response to the situation with regard to the ceasefire, despite the fact that Israel is violating every single part of it. And Netanyahu had a different answer when he responded to questions on what some are calling the Zionist Broadcast Corporation now, with the Barry Weiss hire as the chief editor. CBS interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu, asked him about his response to what Trump said with the war being over. Here's what Netanyahu had to say.
Mr. Trump says the war is over. But clearly the war is not over. The IDF is deployed to sections of Gaza still, and Hamas is still on the streets of Gaza. How can you say the war is over?
Well, we agreed to give peace a chance. We agreed that we should, the conditions in his 20-point plan are very clear. It's not only that we get the hostages out without getting our military out, but that we would subsequently have both demilitarization and disarmament. They're not the same thing. First, Hamas has to give up its arms.
This seems to be a really big slap in Trump's face, but this has been kind of a pattern that's been happening throughout this period since Trump has come into office. There's been almost like this hand-wringing, this boasting by Trump, and then Israel does the exact opposite of what he supposedly has put on the paper.
Obviously, there's not going to be peace, and this ceasefire at some point is going to fall apart. I don't know when, whether in days or weeks or months, or I have no idea. But this is not going to get into the second phase, because the resistance is not going to give up its arms, because we know that if they do, they're going to be massacred. And the people of Palestine will never forgive them, because they're the only protection that the people have. What Trump did, and he's very impulsive. I don't know what goes on in the mind of Trump, thank God, but if we do know that he's very impulsive, but the fact that he said this will make it more costly for the Israeli regime to relaunch the war. Even though I think that if they want to do it, they'll still do it. It's not as if that Trump's words are going to stop Netanyahu, but it will make it more costly. And I think that it will, because it will humiliate Trump. And Trump, he likes humiliating others, not Israelis, but we saw in occupied Palestine how he humiliated Adelson, how in Egypt he humiliated everyone. But if the Israeli regime relaunches the war, then this genocide, then it's not going to look good for him, because he said it is over, and he stressed that it is over. Of course, the regime is going to continue killing people. That's what they do in Lebanon. In Lebanon, every day they're carrying out attacks. They bomb people who are working to rebuild their homes. They bomb people who are working in the field. They bomb people on motorcycles. They bomb people who are driving with vegetables in their van to sell. And they just, a couple of weeks ago, they murdered a Lebanese American family, 3 kids in that family, as well as the father. The 3 children were born in the United States, but no one in the United States cared. No one in power. The U.S. Embassy didn't do anything. Western journalists didn't make a big fuss over it. So there's no reason to think that the Israeli regime, if they do carry out attacks, that there will be any major response coming from the West. However, it will not be good for the regime, because the global campaign and the global hostility that now exists towards the Israeli regime will be reinforced every time they carry out a murder, because none of us are going to let them get away with it. They are now tens of millions of activists across the world who are watching what's going on in Gaza. They're watching what's going on in Palestine. They're watching what's going on across the region. So every time someone is killed, every time someone is injured, Western media is not going to do anything about it. They're silent about Lebanon. They don't say anything about the attacks that we just see every single day. But there are many people who are doing that. And if things, if the Israelis start killing people in Gaza, which they've already done, this is not, it's just going to keep reminding people about the genocide. Every time there's another murder, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza or in Lebanon, people are going to be reminded about 2 years of Holocaust.
Even though you had Trump, he's attempting to humiliate everybody, some very willingly, like UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer during this circus show during the Egypt summit. Now it seems that every time that Trump tries to get this kind of reprieve for himself, Israel, whether Trump gives the green light or not, Israel just keeps going. And that in and of itself is a kind of humiliation, even if Trump doesn't even see it that way, whether because he's just that sociopathic and narcissistic. This genocide and what's going on now is kind of always in the cards and might explain why the resistance has been so steadfast even now.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about some of that context in a bit, but just to deal with the more immediate aspect of what has happened in the last few days is that clearly Donald Trump wanted this ceasefire, as he wanted the ceasefire in January, which lasted until March, of course, with the usual Israeli violations and so on. The question is, will there be follow through? Really, the only guarantee that this ceasefire will continue, and as you noted, it's already being violated in so many ways. Nonetheless, it's not a small thing that for the vast majority of people in Gaza, the day and night bombardment, the massacres of more than 100 people a day, that has stopped for now. And they desperately wanted that. People in Gaza wanted that, and the resistance was responding to that. So that's important to acknowledge, even if we'll talk about the ongoing violations. But my bigger point is that Trump wanted this ceasefire, and he imposed it. He didn't impose it out of the goodness of his heart. He imposed it because it's very clear, even to Israel's biggest fans and sponsors, that Israel has been incapable of doing the things it said it set out to do and wanted to do. We just saw Netanyahu there talking about Trump's 20-point plan, which includes demilitarization and disarmament. I agree with Dr. Marandi, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But why does Netanyahu need that to come from a so-called peace plan from Trump? He said that the Israeli military would do it. 2 years later, they haven't managed to disarm Hamas or the other resistance factions. They have not managed to dismantle the extensive network of resistance tunnels under Gaza. As we see week after week in the videos released by the resistance is still capable of destroying Israeli tanks and armored vehicles and killing Israeli troops in sophisticated ambushes, that there is really no part of Gaza in which the Israeli army could feel safe without the resistance coming after them. Of course, Israel is vastly more powerful, but the resistance is waging a guerrilla war, and they don't face them, army to army on a front line like in a classical war. They are resistance who harass the invaders, who make it very costly for them to stay. And the resistance in Gaza is still completely capable of doing that, and was doing it up to the last day before this ceasefire. Now, in terms of Israel's other goals that they claimed that they were going to achieve, they were going to get their so-called hostages, actually prisoners of war. These are all occupation soldiers who were released, participants in decades of apartheid, occupation, and genocide. He said they were going to get them out through war. They couldn't get any of them out. I think through the last 2 years, they rescued a couple at very high cost, but they killed far more of their own people in Gaza through bombardment, through starvation, and so on. Well, they could only get them out through negotiations. And negotiations with who? Negotiations with Hamas, the group that Israel said they would completely destroy and eradicate. So here we are, after 2 years of genocide. Hamas is still there, and Israel has to negotiate with it. The resistance is still there. They still have their weapons. And Israel couldn't make any significant political achievement despite carrying out a Holocaust in front of the world. And you think about the undeclared goals Israel had, or let's say the unofficially declared goals, because they were declared not necessarily by Netanyahu, but by Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all those types of fanatical characters who he relies on for support. They wanted to ethnically cleanse Gaza, to forcibly expel the population, and to resettle it, to rebuild these fanatical Jewish colonies inside Gaza. And they have completely failed to do that. The people in Gaza refused to leave. And we all saw, as we did in January, we just saw again in the last few days, the moment people in Gaza had the opportunity, they flooded back to the north. They flooded back to Gaza City, to their homes, albeit absolutely destroyed and devastated by this genocidal regime. But their tenacity and their determination to stay on the land could not be defeated by Israel, despite the suffering Israel inflicted and is still inflicting by refusing to honor its commitment to allow at least 600 trucks of aid into Gaza every day. And on the aid, you know, this is just a marker of how far things have fallen from where they're supposed to be in terms of international law. Humanitarian aid, food, water, electricity should never be a bargaining chip. All of that is unconditional under international law. An occupying power doesn't have the right to starve a civilian population in order to achieve its political or military goals. An occupied people is never meant to have to negotiate about baby food and medicine. This is the most depraved violations of international law, but it's become so normalized with Israel that Israel is allowed to negotiate over how many truckloads of baby formula and basic foodstuffs will come into Gaza to achieve, you know, we're going to starve babies because we couldn't win on the battlefield what we said we would win. And that depravity is built into this so-called agreement which Israel is violating. I'll stop there, Danny, but I do want to come back to some of that historical context you talked about.
Till now, the Israeli regime was starving people, and they were starving children. They prevented the flotilla from bringing in infant formula. They prevented trucks from bringing in infant formula. But they claimed that it was because of Hamas or because of the fighting. And now that there's no fighting, now that it's easy to get the trucks in, there's no excuse. They won't let the trucks go in. And it just shows that food is a weapon for these monsters. Food is a weapon for the criminals.
And they haven't given up their fundamental goal. I mean, it was, of course, absurd for Trump to talk about this as a peace summit or that he's solved 3,000 years of conflict. Of course, all of that.
3,000 years, what is even, anyway? Yeah, I can't even speak it when he says that.
But nothing has been solved. Absolutely nothing has been solved. And as Dr. Marandi said, it's difficult to see how this even gets to the second stage of this so-called Trump plan, because the resistance is not going to hand over its weapons and surrender. Why should they surrender in under an agreement what Israel couldn't win on the battlefield, or on the genocide field more accurately? I don't see how we're going to get there, but maybe you're going to ask about this, Danny, but Trump has an element of realism in the sense that he recognized that Hamas is the only force that is capable of maintaining and restoring law and order in Gaza and cleaning up these criminal collaborator gangs hired by Israel, made up of criminals and other elements that they deliberately unleashed during the genocide to steal aid and sow chaos and engage in black market profiteering. Hamas went in immediately and cleaned all that up, got rid of Israel's collaborators, got rid of Israel's thugs. And Donald Trump actually praised Hamas for doing that. And he said, oh, well, we allowed them to keep their weapons for now, but they're going to disarm, or we'll do it violently. Well, that's empty words, because Israel tried for 2 years to do it. And if Israel couldn't do it, how is Donald Trump going to do it? Is he going to send in the Marines to Gaza? I don't think that's even remotely a possibility, but suppose he were to do so. Are they going to do better than the Israeli army? I don't see that happening. So there is a reality that they have been forced to confront despite the rhetoric. And that reality is that the resistance is still there. It's undefeated. The governance structures in Gaza that they promised to destroy reemerged immediately. The Interior Ministry was immediately able to start putting police on the streets,
Right.
Restoring order, restoring some sense of civil life. The Gaza municipality, despite the desperate lack of resources and the fact that Israel, again in violation of this agreement, just like it violated the agreement in January, has not allowed heavy equipment into Gaza to start removing rubble and repairing basic infrastructure. But the Gaza municipality is working, as the municipalities are in other parts of Gaza. So they achieved nothing except a genocide, if you call that an achievement.
The Israeli regime blocked aid for a very long period of time. They prevented anything from getting in. And from day one, they said that they're going to block food. And I mean, if you look at the South African letter to the ICJ, its complaint to the ICJ, the statements of the regime leaders were very clear about their intention for genocide and to starve people, and it's online for people to see. But when they did allow limited food to get in, what they would do was that they would bomb those who were protecting the food. They were protecting the trucks so that they could get to the people. They bombed them. And then these collaborators, they would move in and attack the trucks, steal the goods. And then the Israeli regime, I mean, this is like the most sinister regime in human history. And then the regime would say Hamas is stealing the aid. That's how it worked. So either they would block the food from getting in, and the West never complained about it. They would block, as I said, the flotilla, the trucks. When they did, this was the sinister way in which they reacted. But now they're just exposing themselves again by limiting the food that goes inside Gaza. Now there's a ceasefire, so the trucks should be able to move in. But they're saying, no, we didn't get this body on time, or this body was given to us by mistake. They're just using these as excuses so they could harm people, so that they could starve kids, so they could stunt their growth. These are utter monsters. These are monsters, and they are utterly depraved.
The Trump administration, Donald Trump himself, admitted that Hamas was really necessary to keep order following this ceasefire, given all that has happened to Palestinians. But then he had this desperate statement that Ali also mentioned. I wanted to play because I want people to hear the inflection of it. Oftentimes what happens for Donald Trump is that there's an untenable situation that the US or he can't so-called control. Then he starts saying things both in content and in form that expose kind of the dead-end character nature of where the US and Israel both find themselves.
We have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently.
It does speak to almost a desperation. We just had 2 years of Israel attempting to forcibly, through genocidal violence, to disarm Hamas and the resistance as a whole, and it didn't happen.
Well, again, Trump is impulsive. It's really difficult to take him seriously or anything that he says at face value. If you recall, during the 12-day war with Iran, he said that Iran must surrender and have unconditional surrender. And then he said we may kill the leader. And then he told the people of Tehran to leave the city. Every day he was saying some sort of nonsense and threatening to commit some sort of crime against humanity, which it was doing. I mean, but the point is that a lot of the things that he says, he can't carry out, and the same is true in Gaza. So he says a lot of things, and then he backs down. Even in the trade war, we saw on Liberation Day, he put those tariffs in, and then he had to back down against China when the bond market went into dangerous territory. Nothing that Trump says is really, you cannot count on anything that he says. He may say the complete opposite the next day. But I just wanted to touch upon what happened when he went to Palestine and when he went to the Knesset and then when he went to Egypt. And that is that his remarks, his speech, since he says things that that he doesn't think about carefully, I think it went very bad for him. I think it went very bad for the United States. He admitted basically that his foreign policy is dictated to him by Zionists, by the Edelson family, and that the Golan Heights, the Syrian Golan Heights, that they were given as a gift to the regime by Trump because of them, and of course moving the capital of the regime to Al-Quds or to Jerusalem. All of that was, so he's definitely not American first, and she is definitely not American first either, because he admitted that her love for the Israeli regime, for this genocidal regime, is greater than any feelings that she has for the United States. These sort of things didn't go down well at all. Or, for example, he boasted or laughed about how Netanyahu was seeking all sorts of weapons and the United States gave him whatever he wanted. So he's basically staking claim for the genocide. He's saying, yeah, we were in this together. He's just admitting that he's genocidal. Or the humiliation that we saw in Cairo. All of those leaders who went to Cairo, they betrayed the Palestinian people. They humiliated themselves, and they basically they were whitewashing Trump. But what did Trump do? Was he thankful to them? No, he one by one. I mean, we've seen the different clips go viral. People would watch them here in Tehran and show them to each other and laugh about how he treated the British prime minister and then the Egyptian president and so on and so forth. So Trump, the more Trump talks, the worse it is for the United States. And I think that this whole trip to the region was devastating for the United States. And this just shows that the United States is a declining empire. Its leadership is reflective of that decline. In the past, you had people like Obama, no better than Trump, the same genocidal monster. I mean, Obama, under his leadership, the genocide in Yemen was carried out. Under his leadership, the dirty war in Syria was initiated. Under his leadership, the destruction of Libya took place. I mean, he's no better than Trump. However, he was much smarter. He was much more capable in hypocrisy and in deceiving at least large segments of global public opinion. So I think Trump is very much reflective of the current state of affairs in the United States, a regime that is waging economic war against China, failing, waging military war against Ukraine, failing, carrying out a Holocaust in Gaza, and failing.